Good afternoon and welcome everyone to my talk today, Developers Without Borders, Cross-Cultural Collaboration in XR. My name is Martina, and as elaborated, I'm from NVIDIA, and I'm going to be taking you through this journey today. So first, a bit of a roadmap for you. I'd like to cover a few things. To start with, I want to do a brief review of history of the ecosystem, a dash of the market views, some key things that we need to internalize regarding where we are today, some more on the evolution with respect to collaboration and the challenges that we face, and on the other side, some solution. How and why are XR an attractive option, and how are they being deployed to meet those challenges? Lastly, some quick thoughts on future pitfalls to navigate and potential. So a little bit of history. VR headsets today are not the first of their kind. VR gaming has actually been around for decades, but it simply was never a success. Certainly the technological limitations of the time, coupled with a market not yet ready to embrace the technology, with the icing of a price tag on top, made for some serious headwinds. VR has its own legacy and evolution, and it's important to take a look at some of those iterations of VR from the past. From Ivan Sutherland in 1965 with his Sword of Damocles to Jaron Lanier and VPL and Atari in the 1980s. Everyone remember the Data Glove and VR bodysuits? In the early 1990s, Virtuality Group created VR systems that had a stand-up arena-type system with a vehicle cockpit. Both used built-in displays to put gamers right in the position of the characters they played. Between a first-person shooter they had called Dactyl Nightmare that let players run around shooting each other while being chased, as well as several other titles, they had a memorable presence in the arcades. But with price tags in the $10,000 range, that's not a system that's affordable for consumers. It didn't keep them from being a proponent in the early push for VR, but it did translate into VR not being mainstream enough to make it the next revolution. Many of you might remember the Virtual Boy of the mid-90s. I certainly do. Nintendo was the giant behind this effort, but despite being backed by one of the biggest game companies of the day, it didn't succeed. The Virtual Boy really didn't have what we'd consider color, and although it had stereoscopic 3D, it lacked high-quality graphics. It was cheaper than many of the things that were out there at the time, but it didn't have the core functionality that makes VR work. It didn't have head tracking or hand tracking. It was essentially a 3D viewer system set up to look like VR. In the end, it wasn't the catalyst that either VR or, frankly, Nintendo needed. Today, we have Facebook, Google, HTC, and Microsoft all as active players in this landscape. So what's different this time around? Many factors. Manufacturing has gotten cheaper, faster, more streamlined. Processors are more powerful today than ever before. And the available choices in components, such as optics and power, are far larger in scope. So as crazy as this looks, the real ground truth today is far more extensive. Between the initial major players all re-upping with new versions and standalone and mobile versions as well, Microsoft's play into the space, and various OEM offerings, and plus the third-party solutions, especially in geographies like China, the number of HMDs available as a choice to the end consumer is staggering. But it's also guided by software offerings, support, and geography. Keep in mind that Oculus and Valve dominate the mind and market share for the available applications. And more of the third-party manufacturers recognize this and need to make the investment to ensure that their respective HMDs can actually play in one of those gardens. Business models are hard to figure out during platform shifts. We can look to the playbook of mobile over the last decade as an example. AR and VR is the fourth major platform shift after PC, web, and mobile. At the end of the day, business models come down to install bases, use cases, and unit economics. Facebook paid $2 billion for Oculus. Magic Leap took $1.4 billion from Google. And Apple bought Mateo. Plus, you've got major commitments from Microsoft, HTC and Valve, of course, Sony and Samsung. All these are heavyweights, right? They're serious folks. It's not their first rodeo. But hardware is a hard race to win. So why this much interest in an unproven early-stage hardware market? Look at the future through the lens of the past, and that's really what's happening right now. Over the next year, developers are going to continue to focus on creating more collaborative and social experiences in AR and VR. Facebook's announced plans for Oculus certainly underscore this. In addition to its partnership with Magic Leap, the NBA recently announced a partnership between Turner Sports and Intel that's going to allow fans to watch things like the 2018 All-Star Game in VR. There's also concerns that advancements in AR/VR will have negative effects, including furthering social disconnects. But the overwhelming data from the ecosystem is that the collaborative and social experiences will be the future of AR and VR. And it shows that technology can actually bring people together. Oculus Rift and HTC Valve ran neck and neck at the top of the list for platforms that companies are developing for, a result that largely matches the sales and placement data in the Steam survey that came out back in January. The third runner-up was essentially Samsung Gear VR, followed by Windows mixed reality headsets and Google's Daydream VR, which, by the way, offered us all access to VR content from the 2018 Winter Olympics this year. Video games have commanded the lion's share of attention from companies on current development efforts, though now we're seeing nearly as many developers elaborate another category, that being other. If you do a data drill down, it turns out that this other category essentially is content not related to entertainment. As a point example, one developer stated his company was developing VR simulations for real estate, architecture, engineering, medical and healthcare, and the oil and the gas industry. Other development groups touted training and visualization for the aerospace industry, industrial training, and real-time in-surgery holograms. So although the curve will likely track to gaming still being the area where we continue to see large percentage of investments in the next 12 months, more practical applications are going to make major gains as well. Many experts are keeping a very close eye on the applications of XR in healthcare, with outfits such as Grandview Research projecting that the market will reach $5.1 billion by 2025. The consumer market is not going to be the end-all be-all. Rather, enterprise has and will do much better. Virtual and augmented reality deliver a profoundly different and exciting way of interacting with computing environments beyond today's traditional device ecosystem. To date, XR applications in the market are fascinating consumers as they unlock rich and immersive content. As the technology matures, these experiences will create new opportunities and value for both customers and businesses. Generally speaking, the VR/AR space can be divided into three general areas of opportunity: software and content, endpoint devices, and core infrastructure. The possibilities and use cases for XR go beyond today's conventional thinking. It's a fair bet that when anyone hears about VR and AR, most consumers basically default to gaming, which, using the available opportunities I talked about, only touches on one of those areas in that map: endpoints. Certainly, there's been a substantial investment by the likes of Oculus, Magic Leap, Microsoft, and Google, and it's led in part to a consumer perception of VR/AR products as predominantly an endpoint, consumer-focused technology. Software and content categories, however, represent a larger space. As consumers adopt VR and AR in greater numbers and cross the chasm, we're going to see the full extent of those opportunities blossom. As an example, retail is one area where XR holds great potential. A recent Goldman Sachs report disclosed e-commerce is a $1.5 trillion market today, while representing 6% of all retail spending worldwide. There's a very strong belief that there's potential to revolutionize e-commerce, opening previously either untouched markets or difficult-to-reach segments of the market. So an example of this can be seen from the platform provider Shopify and their Thread Studio. They launched the solution in September, and while currently it's still tied to the HTC Vive platform, they do have plans to expand to other VR and AR devices. As the head of VR at Shopify shared, Thread Studio is a new and interactive way of testing out t-shirt designs. The user gets placed inside a virtual photo studio where he or she can upload pre-created designs and then basically lay them on a shirt already put on a mannequin. It's not the first time XR has taken retail to the next level either. Within the last year, the industry has watched two well-known companies, Microsoft and Volvo, come together to further advance technology within the retail space as well. Volvo has taken a heightened interest in streamlining the buying process for the consumer by deploying AR. The experience is slightly different than VR because the user is not fully immersed in the technology. But in an interview with Nina Larson, the director of Volvo's retail marketing, she reveals that the Hololens can allow our customers to see features, colors, and options. So rather than working on the computer seeing things, you can actually be part of the experience. Not only does this technology help visualize the car that the buyer may purchase, but it also explains some of the more difficult features within the vehicle itself. Under this paradigm, it's kind of easy to see how VR and AR technology can also be used as an advanced teaching device, especially with the immersion component. The healthcare industry has a tremendous potential to benefit greatly from the integration of XR technologies in a variety of ways, including diagnosis, planning, training, and even treatments. The benefits of implementing these technologies will have a profound effect on patient and doctor relations and how primary and secondary care are delivered. While the technology is still in the beginning stages, there are many companies investing in research to bring XR applications to life. One example, Infinidec is conducting research on how omnidirectional treadmills can be used for physical therapy when coupled with a virtual reality headset. Early trials have identified a use case to help people recovering from traumas to more quickly regain balance and movement with fewer falls. Infinidec's technology also has the potential to gamify exercise, something we all enjoy doing, right? Prompting people to exercise more with the intent of promoting healthier lifestyles and reducing long-term healthcare needs. Though technology is getting cheaper is usually a sign that we're advancing and the market is fertile ground, it still follows the path that we've seen time and time again. Everyone is familiar with Gartner's hype cycle graph as evidence that everything's fine. The graph shows that new technology routinely enters a trough of disillusionment after a period of inflated expectations. Now, if you were to believe our social media news cycle today, VR is either currently in or just coming out of that trough of disillusionment. And of course, if it follows the graph, it's going to soon move into the slope of enlightenment, where the technology matures and eventually gets to true mainstream adoption. VR's current trajectory has so much in common with personal computers. Remember back in the 1970s when the Apple II and Atari 800 were released? The price point was somewhere in the neighborhood of $1,500 to $2,000. And most people said, wow, these are so cool, but who can afford this? Sales obviously were initially very low, but they were supported by the early adopters and the curious affluent. And we all know how that story played out. So let's set the stage. Collaboration across geographies and cultures has always been somewhat constrained by the technology of the era. From 1990s to 2000, telepresence was largely phone, email, and some video, though not great quality. The best success you had was time spent face-to-face on location. From 2000 to 2010, roughly, we began to see many more conferencing tools and better conferencing tools. Things like WebEx, GoToMeeting, Skype dominated. Data speeds and connectivity worldwide saw marked improvement. And although time on location was still optimal, the productivity you could get with the options available was a much more feasible proposition. I know, I lived through it. From 2010 going forward, you've got not only good conferencing tools, good quality streaming, good data speeds, but you now have XR. What can't you do? The equation has changed from physical presence being a necessity to becoming a nice to have, but not needed. It's also no secret that our current political climate has inserted some challenges into the collaboration paradigm. From the executive orders on travel that are currently continuously being battled in our courts, to the changes being done in the allocation of visas across the board, the landscape today is markedly different than just even a few years ago. Companies both established and on the startup spectrum that want to support a global development team also still face the run-of-the-mill logistical challenges, for example, travel time and capital expenditure. So how does XR provide potential solutions for collaboration? A blue ocean is new territory, something XR creators know very, very well. It has very little competition, and it doesn't require measuring competitive advantage. It's a completely different game than the one everyone else is playing. Because XR is a complete platform change for most problems, it's often going to be competing against the existing platform, such as completing a job via 2D apps for desktop or mobile, watching a video, or even completing the physical task with tools. Most often, it'll be replacing our current screens. Some of the real results companies are seeing from the implementation of XR solutions, especially in the area of collaborative work, include a reduction in the cost of workforce training, reduction in the cost of product design for remote teams, reduction in just general production cycle times, and also reductions in customer service costs, travel costs, and even error costs. Chances are for many companies today, XR can either be a part of the value chain or the delivery of their product. As an example, a given industry might compete on the speed of production. By using XR to train new machine operators, they can reduce the time and cost of training, raising effectiveness on the speed factor, and thus taking a competitive edge. Some examples, a team at a company called Scope AR is creating AR instruction manuals for manufacturing floors. Logistics company, DHL, successfully carried out a pilot project testing smart glasses and AR in a warehouse in the Netherlands. In cooperation with Ricoh and Ubimax, it used the technology to implement vision picking, basically in warehousing operations. Workers were guided through the warehouse by graphics displayed on the smart glass to speed up the picking process and also reduce errors. The pilot proved that AR offers added value to logistics and resulted in a 25% efficiency increase during the picking process. Ford was one of the first automakers to go all in on virtual technology, all the way back in 1999. In 2014, Forbes reported that the company employed VR reality specialists to lead the way for engineers to design and build entire vehicles, including autonomous vehicles, completely in a virtual environment. Today, Ford has a mandatory multifunctional VR review for all vehicles that go into production. AR and VR can speed the onboarding of new workers and improve productivity by offering more immersive, on-the-job training. AR smart glasses that project video, graphics, and text can visually guide a worker step by step through assembly or maintenance tasks. All that's needed for the worker to complete a repair, for example, could be to gaze at the machine part needing to be repaired. Upskill and GE Renewable Energy conducted a productivity study using AR to assist workers in wiring a wind turbine. When comparing first-time use of smart glasses powered with upskill skylight software against the traditional process, they saw an immediate 34.5% productivity improvement. For any company focusing on helping enterprises innovate along their value chain, it's now a low-hanging fruit. For companies that create headsets or infrastructure, their entire solution may be a standalone XR product. As an example, let's look at Skype on Hololens. For starters, Skype for Hololens is not really competing with other XR conferencing products yet. It's competing against other ways of getting the job done. They're not necessarily competing with new social VR software, such as Facebook Spaces. They're competing with substitutes. Products reach a blue ocean when they successfully change the way the game is played. Your competitive factors are the definition of how the job works in the mind of the customer today. To change it, your offering needs to change the way it emphasizes these factors and/or introduce completely new ones to the marketplace. In the Skype for HoloLens case, they took the approach of reducing and eliminating competitive factors. In-person meetings have the ultimate user base, real life. HoloLens, on the other hand, was a very small user base. With a 3 to 5K price point on the headset, it's very unaffordable for most individuals. Microsoft is sacrificing volume for creating new value that has never been created before. Skype on HoloLens is not as easy to get set up as most other solutions, and the recording ability, at least in the first generation, is a workaround. Making these sacrifices allows Microsoft to create new value proposition that most tech companies couldn't achieve as quickly. Despite the headset kinks, the strategy behind Skype for HoloLens is to basically mimic the best things about in-person meetings, like the range of motion, the ability to share visuals, and most importantly, that feeling of connectedness, and bringing those attributes into remote collaboration. If you have the device already, using Skype costs as much as using the desktop version. Doesn't cost you anything extra. But the added value is tremendous. Skype has achieved differentiation without raising cost. That is, sans the headset cost. Some of the collaboration in XR and the examples I've mentioned wouldn't be possible without the tools and software support. And although I have a few companies represented here, it's by no means the entire field. Many of the major independent software vendors that you know well either already have XR-ready software or are working on ensuring that existing tool suites can work seamlessly in XR environments. There are also a number of new players coming into the space ready to deploy a solution for a critical piece of that value chain. NVIDIA has its own platform, Holodeck, which empowers designers and stakeholders to collaborate in a 3D virtual environment. With geography removed as a barrier, remote teams can easily conduct product reviews and gain immediate visual, voice, and gestural feedback from participants. Development timelines can be shortened by viewing photorealistic 3D models generated from actual CAD data while reducing physical prototype iterations. Though the future is bright for XR in general and its impact on collaboration, it isn't without its own challenges, and I'll use VR as the base case here. Barriers come down on both sides, hardware and software. Even with the aggressive price wars between HMD manufacturers, price points are still considered high. Though mobile solutions such as the Oculus Go and Daydream are pushing better experiences, the best VR still has to offer is tethered to the PC, which also has a high requirement bar in order to obtain that experience. Then there are the physical considerations. Headsets still have a way to go in terms of overall weight and ergonomics, though they're getting better. Nausea is still a concern among a large swath of users, myself included. And although controllers have gotten much, much better, consumer-grade haptics is still not out of the science lab yet. Software barriers, in addition to those revolving around content, also include those for development. API unification among all HMDs, sadly, is not yet quite a reality, though again, it's one of the things we're working on. A developer has to seriously target the choice of platform because content, playability, UI, and actual potential market reach will all be greatly influenced by that choice that's made. But here's the thing. The big guys are continuing to make the big bets, and in the process, they're pulling many others into the slipstream to join in the adventure. With all of the demonstrated potential in XR and collaborative efforts, it's a hard sell not to believe in a future dominated by this technology. Perhaps the key point of difference among all the observers is the eventual timeline of the mainstream. I hope you've enjoyed this session. Thanks for listening, and happy to take questions.